The criminal justice system has seen many sentences spanning decades, but not everyone deserves to be imprisoned for life. Some individuals have spent the majority of their lives behind bars, whether for serious crimes or due to wrongful convictions. The stories below not only highlight the harsh realities of prison, but also raise questions about justice, rehabilitation, and the challenges of reintegration into society. Let's explore the cases of prisoners who spent decades behind bars and their journeys to freedom. What do you think about these fates? Should any of them have been released earlier? Or were there some who should never have left prison? Hit like and follow to make sure you don't miss more shocking stories. Share this post with your friends to discuss some of the longest prison sentences in history. Joe Ligon's story began in a challenging environment. Born in Alabama, he had a difficult start and moved to Philadelphia with his family at the age of 13. At just 15 years old, Ligon was involved in a violent crime alongside 4 other teenagers, which resulted in 2 murders. While he admitted to taking part in the stabbings during the incident, he denied any involvement in the 2 deaths. However, he was still convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ligon's trial was swift, lasting only a single day, with little consideration given to his age or defense conditions. It's important to note that at the time, juvenile offenders were often treated the same as adults in the criminal justice system, with little understanding of adolescent brain development or the potential for rehabilitation. Ligon's case was not unique, as the U.S. faced a growing number of juveniles sentenced to life without parole. Despite his young age, he was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole, and his case became a focal point for advocates pushing for juvenile justice reform. After many years in prison, Ligon was offered clemency in the 1970s, but he refused because it came with parole conditions. This decision became a defining moment in his fight for justice, as Ligon was determined to maintain his dignity rather than accept parole terms he felt would undermine his sense of fairness. In 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that life sentences without parole for juveniles were unconstitutional, making Ligon's case eligible for review. This Supreme Court decision was a major turning point in the juvenile justice system, recognizing the capacity for rehabilitation and growth in young offenders. It acknowledged that life without parole fails to account for the potential for change in youth. In 2017, after serving 64 years in prison, Ligon was finally granted parole, making him the longest-serving juvenile lifer in U.S. history. His case sparked debates about justice, childhood, and the potential for rehabilitation in young offenders. During his time in prison, Ligon underwent a remarkable transformation. He participated in educational programs, engaged in therapy, and worked toward self-improvement. His case became a symbol of the movement to reform sentencing for juvenile offenders. Ligon's release was also influenced by the growing public awareness of the disproportionate impact of harsh sentences on minority and disadvantaged communities. As a black man, Ligon's experience reflects broader racial inequalities within the criminal justice system. His release sparked discussions about restorative justice, emphasizing the need to consider the circumstances surrounding crimes committed by juveniles, especially in cases involving systemic inequities and lack of opportunities. Ligon's journey remains an example of both the flaws and the potential for change within the U.S. justice system. His story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of redemption, even after decades of incarceration. I had the opportunity to meet Aaron Glenn, who was once the longest-serving inmate on death row in the United States. Aaron Glenn's journey began on a fateful day in Shreveport, Louisiana, in 1984. He was convicted of the murder of Isidore Roseman, a jeweler who was found shot to death in his store. Glenn, who worked as a gardener at Roseman's home, was near the crime scene and was quickly arrested based on circumstantial evidence. The prosecution's case was weak, yet Glenn was still sentenced to death despite the lack of concrete evidence and the state's concealment of crucial information. His case became one of the most well-known examples of wrongful convictions in Louisiana, a state notorious for its high number of death penalty cases and racial disparities within the justice system. Glenn's trial was marked by a series of legal errors, including court-appointed attorneys who lacked experience in criminal law, leading to a flawed defense. The jury, composed entirely of white members, convicted Glenn and sentenced him to death. His defense was further hindered by his attorney's lack of preparation, as they failed to thoroughly investigate the evidence or present a strong argument in his favor. These shortcomings were not uncommon in death penalty cases involving defendants from minority communities. Glenn's case also reflected systemic racial bias, which has often played a significant role in sentencing, particularly in the American South. Glenn's legal team discovered in the 2000s that crucial evidence had been withheld. In 2013, it was revealed that another man, Jake Robinson, had confessed to the murder. Robinson had been a suspect from the beginning, but was never thoroughly investigated. Glenn's attorneys found that prosecutors had failed to disclose key evidence that could have proven his innocence, including Robinson's confession, which law enforcement had ignored at the time of the trial. After nearly 30 years on death row, Glenn's conviction was overturned in 2014. His release was both a tragic and triumphant conclusion to a wrongful conviction, making him one of many whose lives were forever altered by the failures of the justice system. After gaining his freedom, Glenn became a powerful advocate for criminal justice reform and raising awareness about the flaws within the legal system. Unfortunately, Glenn did not live long enough to fully enjoy his newfound freedom. He passed away in 2015 from lung cancer, just months after his release, after enduring 3 decades on death row for a crime he did not commit. Glenn's case became a significant point in the conversation about wrongful convictions, highlighting the profound consequences of failures within the legal system. His story also fueled calls for reform in Louisiana, particularly regarding the use of the death penalty and the handling of evidence. Glenn's wrongful conviction serves as a stark reminder of the potential for errors in the justice system, especially for those who lack the resources for a proper defense or face systemic bias. Though his death was tragic, it underscored the urgent need for reform to prevent others from suffering a similar fate. Born in 1924, Francis Smith's life was forever changed after he was convicted in 1950 for a murder he may not have committed. In 1949, a night watchman named Grover Hart was killed at the Indian Harbor Yacht Club in Greenwich, Connecticut. Smith, a minor offender at the time, was sentenced to life in prison for his alleged role in the murder, despite his claims of innocence. The case against Smith was weak, with crucial details about his involvement remaining unclear. His conviction became a subject of doubt among legal experts and observers, many of whom believed he had been wrongfully imprisoned. Smith's journey through the criminal justice system was long and complicated. After escaping from a prison farm in 1967, he spent 12 days on the run, evading a large-scale manhunt. He was eventually recaptured and incarcerated in multiple facilities, including the Osborne Correctional Institution. He was released in September 2020 after nearly 70 years of incarceration, most of which he spent behind bars. His prolonged imprisonment raised questions about the fairness of his trial and the severity of his sentence, especially as perspectives on his guilt evolved. After being offered clemency several years earlier, Smith was initially hesitant to accept it. However, he eventually agreed to a release arrangement and was placed in a facility for elderly parolees. Since his release, Smith has shown no signs of misconduct, suggesting that his time in prison may have influenced his outlook. His case is part of a broader discussion about aging prisoners, a growing issue as more individuals serve long sentences into old age. Legal experts and even some individuals involved in Smith's case have expressed concerns about how his trial and sentencing were handled, with some even arguing that he should never have been convicted in the first place. The tragic incident that led to Francis Smith's sentence remains a subject of controversy. The murder of Grover Hart, a 68-year-old security guard, took place at the Indian Harbor Yacht Club in 1949. It was a violent crime involving 2 gunmen and 2 firearms. One of the men, George Loudon, pleaded guilty and accused Smith of being the second gunman, which led to Smith's conviction. However, later developments in the case painted a different picture. After completing his sentence, Loudon admitted that his testimony accusing Smith had been coerced by authorities. A key witness who had testified against Smith also recanted their statement, further raising doubts about Smith's guilt. Additionally, a man named David Blumetti, who was serving time in an Alabama prison, came forward and confessed to being the second gunman. These revelations cast serious doubt on the fairness of Smith's conviction and the life sentence that followed. Zachary Fry, a data analyst with a passion for researching historical cases, closely examined the case and uncovered strong evidence suggesting that Smith was not the perpetrator. Fry believes the case is a clear example of a miscarriage of justice, where a man was convicted based on faulty evidence and unreliable witness testimony. He argues that Smith's wrongful conviction and the rejection of his appeals in the 1960s exposed serious flaws in the legal system. The troubling way Smith's case was handled suggests that his conviction should never have stood. Smith's near execution in 1954, just hours before he was scheduled to be put to death, was a pivotal moment in his case. A last-minute reprieve saved his life and converted his sentence into a long-term prison term, a turning point, yet one that did not erase the damage that had already been done. Had Smith been executed or remained imprisoned for life, his wrongful conviction might have gone unnoticed, buried without justice ever being served. What do you think about these stories? Was justice truly served, or are there still injustices that need to be addressed? Join the discussion. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Like and share if you found this story thought-provoking. Follow us to stay updated on more compelling cases. You may have heard of long-serving prisoners, but have you ever heard of someone who holds a Guinness World Record? Meet Paul Geidel Jr., a man whose time behind bars became legendary. Born on May 1, 1894, in Hartford, Connecticut, Paul's life was shaped by tragedy. His father, a heavy drinker and saloon owner, passed away when Paul was just 5 years old. This loss led him to spend much of his childhood moving between Hartford and New York City, living in hotels. At 17, Paul went down a dark path, starting to commit robbery. In one robbery, he killed 73-year-old wealthy broker William H. Jackson at the Iroy Hotel in New York by using a chloroform-soaked rag to strangle the victim, then took only a few dollars. After being arrested 2 days later, Paul was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. He began his sentence at the famous Sing Sing prison, where his behavior later helped him get a reduced sentence. However, in 1926, doctors declared him insane, and he was transferred to the Danmura State Hospital for the criminally insane. Paul spent many years in various prisons, but it wasn't until 1972 that he was transferred to the Fishkill Correctional Facility, a place for elderly prisoners. There, Paul found a more comfortable routine and even developed a good relationship with the prison staff, who sometimes took him to events like baseball games. After serving 63 years, Paul was granted parole in 1980 at the age of 86, but surprisingly, he chose not to leave prison. Having spent most of his adult life incarcerated and losing contact with his family, he felt alienated from the outside world and decided to stay for another 6 years. In 1980, at 86 years old, Paul finally left Fishkill after serving one of the longest sentences in U.S. prison history. He spent his final years in Beacon, New York, and passed away at the age of 93. Paul's life is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and his case remains one of the most notable in criminal history. Meet Thomas Jones, arrested in 1944 as a young boy and sentenced to a harsh penalty befitting his crime. This is a prime example of a child committing a crime when he mercilessly killed all his classmates with a hunting knife. However, by 2025, he was finally released, a remarkable feat after 8 decades in prison. When he was arrested, Batman was only 5 years old. Stanley Kubrick had only made one film. Just think about how long ago that was. The fact that he survived through all that time is unprecedented and truly remarkable. As always, let us know your thoughts in the comments below and use Have you ever heard the story of Johnson Van Dyke Griggsby? He is the man behind Johnny Cash's song Michigan City, but his story is more than just that. Griggsby was born in February 1886 or 1888, though he wasn't sure about the exact year. Born into a family descended from freed slaves, in 1900, Griggsby and his family moved from Shelby County, Kentucky, to Cuckoo, Indiana. This move was part of the larger Great Migration of African Americans from the South to northern cities during the Great Migration era, when many sought better economic opportunities and to escape racial violence. Griggsby's life took a tragic turn in 1908, when he was 20 years old and killed a white man named James Brown during a poker game at a bar in Anderson, Illinois. The conflict began with racist remarks and escalated into a violent fight when Brown pulled out a knife. Griggsby ran outside to grab his own knife. When he returned, Brown threw a chair at him, and in response, Griggsby fatally stabbed Brown. To avoid the death penalty, Griggsby pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to prison, receiving inmate number 4045. Griggsby's case attracted local attention and reflected the deep racial tensions of the era, especially in the context of relations between white and black people. Griggsby spent 66 years in prison, nearly 50 of those in a mental hospital. Throughout his long incarceration, Griggsby faced significant mental health challenges, which was not uncommon for prisoners in the early 20th century, especially those held in harsh conditions. However, he became a model prisoner. During his time in prison, he spent his days reading the Bible, a dictionary, and an encyclopedia. all of which helped expand his knowledge and stimulate his curiosity. He also developed a passion for writing, composing poetry and writing letters expressing his desire for redemption. Despite his humble beginnings and a violent youth, Griggsby's works reflected deep self-reflection. He applied for parole 33 times before finally being released in December 1974 at the age of 86, having spent most of his life behind bars. However, adapting to life on the outside was not easy. After decades of imprisonment, Griggsby felt overwhelmed by the rapid changes in the world around him, from new technology and different social customs to the fast-paced lifestyle. His story is an important reminder of the challenges of reintegration, especially for those who have been incarcerated for long periods. At 90, he voluntarily returned to prison for 17 months before being released once again. This time, at 91, he was completely free and found peace in a nursing home in Marion County, where he could live comfortably following a structured routine. Life in the nursing home allowed him to thrive in a stable environment, something he had never experienced for most of his life. His final years brought Griggsby peace, as he was surrounded by people who understood the challenges of old age and the importance of stability. Griggsby's story is a powerful reminder of the impact of long-term incarceration on an individual and their ability to reintegrate into society. His unique experience highlights the gaps in prison reform and the need for better support systems for formerly incarcerated individuals. As someone who spent most of his life in prison, Griggsby's story is an emotional journey of personal growth, regret, and the search for redemption. Ultimately, his story stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of immense challenges. The story of Richard Honeck is another case that breaks the boundaries of a typical prison sentence. Born on January 5, 1879, into a wealthy family that dealt in agricultural equipment, Richard's life took a dark turn when, at the age of 20, he was arrested for the murder of Walter F. Kerr in September 1899. Honeck, along with his accomplice Herman Hundhausen, broke into Kerr's room armed with various weapons, including knives and guns, with the intent to rob him. Kerr, a key witness in previous cases against them, was found dead with multiple stab wounds. After the murder, Honeck was sentenced to life in prison. He spent the early part of his sentence at Joliet Prison, where in 1912 he stabbed a prison assistant. This act led to him being placed in solitary confinement and chained for several months. However, he was later transferred to the Southern Illinois prison, where he worked in the prison bakery for 35 years. After more than 60 years in prison, Honeck was released on December 20, 1963. Thanks to the successful intervention of his granddaughter, Clara Orr. After his release, Honeck settled in Sutherland, Oregon, where he spent his remaining years. In 1971, at the age of 92, he was placed in a nursing home in Roseburg, where he lived until his death in December 1976, at the age of 97. The long life behind bars and his release in his later years show how time can change a person, as well as the challenges faced by those reintegrating into society after decades of imprisonment. John Franzese Sr. was a significant figure in the world of organized crime, with a career spanning over 8 decades. He began his association with the notorious Colombo crime family in the 1930s, and by 1963, he was appointed as the family's underboss. His criminal activities were extensive, including orchestrating a series of bank robberies across the United States. However, his criminal empire collapsed in 1967 when he was arrested and sentenced to 50 years in prison. Initially, it seemed he would serve a lengthy sentence, but by 1978, Franz Sr. was granted parole. However, his nature remained unchanged, and he continued to violate parole conditions, being sent back to prison at least 6 times. In 2004, he was arrested again, but by 2005, he was reinstated as the underboss of the Colombo family under Tomas Jelly. By 2007, he was back in prison for violating parole once again. While still serving his sentence in 2008, John Franzese Sr. continued to face new charges. He was accused of being involved in murders during the bloody gang wars between the Colombo families in the early 1990s, as well as being linked to other crimes such as fur coat thefts in New York and a home burglary in Los Angeles. These allegations led to a series of charges related to extortion, robbery, drug trafficking, and other criminal activities. However, despite facing serious accusations, Franzese managed to maintain his position as underboss within the gang due to a lack of concrete evidence. Ultimately, it was his own son, John Franzese Jr., who played a key role in bringing him down. In 2005, Franzese Jr. secretly wore a recording device and collected incriminating conversations from his father. These recordings were crucial in securing an additional 8-year prison sentence for Franzese Sr. on charges of extortion and other criminal activities. Despite his severely declining health, Franzese Sr. was denied compassionate release in 2016. However, in June 2017, at the age of 103, he was released, becoming the oldest federal prisoner in U.S. history at that time. Sadly, Franzese passed away in February 2020. His tumultuous life left a lasting impact on both his family and the world of organized crime. Joseph Sledge's life took a tragic turn on September 6, 1976, when 2 women were brutally murdered in Elizabethtown, North Carolina. Both victims were stabbed multiple times and showed signs of a violent struggle. The police investigation quickly focused on Joseph, who had just escaped from a minimum security prison and was considered a suspect due to his criminal record. Joseph was arrested and charged after a series of confessions in prison, but he always maintained his innocence. In 1978, Joseph was put on trial for murder. Despite vehemently denying any involvement in the case, the jury still convicted him with 2 consecutive life sentences. Joseph appealed to the North Carolina Supreme Court, but all efforts to overturn the conviction were unsuccessful. In the following decades, he filed over 25 post-conviction appeals, asserting that the original trial had errors and that one of the key witnesses, Herman Baker, had lied under duress. However, these appeals yielded no results. The turning point came in 2012 when evidence previously thought to be lost was found. DNA testing on a pubic hair sample collected from the crime scene showed that it did not match Joseph. This discovery prompted a deeper investigation, and in 2013, Herman Baker recanted his testimony, admitting that he had been coerced into falsely accusing Joseph. The investigation continued to uncover more shocking details, including the fact that prosecutors had deliberately withheld crucial evidence that could have exonerated Joseph during the original trial. In January 2015, a panel of judges from the North Carolina Supreme Court declared Joseph completely innocent. After more than 36 years of wrongful imprisonment, he was released. becoming the longest-serving wrongfully convicted prisoner in North Carolina to be exonerated by DNA evidence. After his release, Joseph was compensated $750,000 for the years he spent wrongfully imprisoned. However, despite his legal victory, his case remains a harsh reminder of the flaws in the justice system. Some people, including the granddaughter of one of the victims, still refuse to believe in his innocence. It serves as a serious reminder of the gaps in the justice system, especially when some, like the granddaughter of one of the victims, continue to deny his innocence. These stories not only reflect the harshness of the justice system, but also showcase the resilience of the human spirit when faced with decades-long sentences. Life behind bars doesn't end when the prison doors open. It marks the beginning of a new battle, reintegration into society, confronting the past, and seeking a second chance. So, what do you think? Who among them deserves the opportunity to rebuild their life? Share your thoughts with us.